This right here is the Atomos Ninja V, a monitor for your camera, but also so much more. It is in DNxHR, ProRes, ProRes RAW, and H.265 recorder, which goes directly to SSDs, and it has a bunch of expansion packs, which I'm going to cover in another video as well. However, today in this video, I want to talk about a firmware upgrade that this recorder got about a year ago, which basically added the functionality to record time-lapse. And to get there, you actually just go into the menu and then you can go into the time-lapse settings. This mode had me curious at the start. Why in the world would you need a time-lapse feature on this type of a recorder? Most of the cameras that I shoot with nowadays have this built in, like the Canon EOS R as well as the Canon EOS R5C. Most of these actually also shoot RAW photos in time-lapse mode. So you have actually that much more data to work with when you are shooting a raw 45 megapixel picture and then working all of those raw photos into Lightroom and have that whole raw workflow and then making it a video file. Alternatively, most of the modern cameras also have the option to directly store the time-lapse into a video file. So you basically have a 10-minute video compressed down to, let's say, 30 seconds, and you have all of that done in a 4K video file. So it had me really curious, why in the world would I use the Atomos Ninja V, which uses its own battery, has a screen that is powered during the whole process, and I have to run the camera as well in video mode so that the Atomos actually can do its thing as a recorder. However, I then quickly understood that, for one, not all cameras have a time-lapse mode, and second, the type of shootings that I am doing are by no means the ones that other people might be experiencing. In terms of, for example, not having the power to run the monitor, that's something that I always think about because I don't want to lug around tons and tons of batteries. But for a different type of shoot, maybe that's absolutely no problem at all because you just simply bring them in your car and the car is just 50 meters from wherever you're filming. So these type of considerations can go out the window depending on your use case. However, what is really nice is that with this setup and with the Atomos Ninja V as a time-lapse recorder, you actually have the option to record ProRes RAW as well as all of the other ProRes codecs as a time-lapse video, saving you a bunch of time in the processing if, for example, you're willing to sacrifice the benefits of just simply shooting raw photos with a mirrorless camera for your time-lapse workflow. So for example, if you're shooting with a RED camera, or you're shooting with a RE camera, or you're shooting with the R5C and you want to have the ProRes RAW file in the recorder, all of those things are possible now with the built-in time-lapse mode in the Atomos Ninja V. Now I'm gonna go quickly into these settings for you so you can see what is going on there. And there you can see you can go into the time-lapse setting whenever you have upgraded your firmware to do so. And that process obviously is really easy. You just simply download the file, put it on the SSD, you put the SSD into the recorder and you power it on, ideally with a constant power source like the power brick adapter. In the settings for time-lapse, you just have capture, and that is how many frames or how many seconds of something you want to capture, how often you want this to happen, like for example, every second, every minute, or every hour. And then you have how long should this run for. In this case, you can go either it should run for seconds, for minutes, or for hours, or for a set number of frames. Now, the most common use case I would use this for is probably running it at 1 frame every 1 second for a set number of minutes, because that of course gives me a certain number of frames to work with, and then I can work with that time-lapse recording in post-processing. However, if you want to do more extreme time lapses, or for example, you want a time-lapse that has a very specific length in terms of how many frames you want to record, then of course you can also go and change this to basically say frames. So let's say you want, for example, let's go to 999, which is the maximum number of frames or minutes or hours or seconds that this can run for. And now you would send 1 frame every 1 second for 999 frames. In this case, of course, that would be also 999 seconds. However, if you change this, for example, to, let's say I want to have 5 frames every 1 second for 999 frames, So now you would have that 999 divided by 5 as the runtime, and in this time it actually would result in just a 0.0005 runtime. I don't think that's accurate. However, if we go and say we want this in seconds, now if we want 5 frames recorded every 1 second for 999 seconds, then this would result in a 2-minute, 52-second, and 7-frame time lapse. So in a way, this actually gives you certain possibilities in terms of the setup and the flexibility of the settings that you might not have in other cameras. Because in most other setups, you probably only have the option to say how long in between frames and then how many frames or for how long do you want this time lapse to run. Here, you actually have the option to say I want to capture 5 frames every 1 minute or every 1 second, and then I have that running for a certain amount of time. And neatly enough, they also display how long the final video file will be if you let it run for the full duration of this. So now what I can do, I can enable and disable the time-lapse mode itself. When you disable it, then you don't have the time-lapse record button, you have the normal record button down here. But if you enable it, then we can X this away, and now I can basically say start. And from now on, this will actually capture 1 frame every 1 second, and this will store into a UHD 29.97 file in ProRes 422 LT, which obviously none of my cameras would be storing if I were to do the time-lapse with just their inbuilt mechanisms for these types of things. But again, personally, I don't really see myself using this because it's just so much more cumbersome than to use the internal modes that cameras have most of the time. With that said, I hope this was an informative video for you about the time-lapse mode of the Atomos Ninja V. If you have any specific projects or workflows where this time-lapse feature is really crucial, please let those in the comment section down below because I'm really curious to read about those. And of course, please give this video a thumbs up if it was really helpful. And now, have an amazing day, make it your life, and I will see you in another video. Ciao, ciao!